What happens when a poor neighbor plants flowers on an abandoned street? 6 months later, the mayor knocks on his door. You won't believe what happened next. This story will change how you see your own neighborhood forever. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves of change. When Harold Martinez decided to plant flowers on the most neglected street in his town, nobody expected what would happen. The abandoned street became something magical. The poor neighbor's simple gesture sparked a transformation that reached the highest levels of city government. If you think one person can't make a difference, this story will prove you wrong. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments about a time someone in your neighborhood made a difference. Now, let me tell you about Harold and the day that changed everything. Main story. Harold Martinez had lived on Elm Street for 37 years. He'd watched it slowly decay from a vibrant neighborhood where children played hopscotch on sidewalks and neighbors chatted over garden fences to what city planners politely called an area of concern and what everyone else simply avoided. The street had become a forgotten corner of Riverside, a small city in Ohio where Harold had raised his 3 children after immigrating from El Salvador in the 80s. At 62, Harold worked nights at a packaging plant, earning just enough to keep his small 2-bedroom house and help his daughter Maria with her college expenses. His neighbors often wondered how he maintained such a positive outlook. Mrs. Chan from next door would sometimes see him humming old Spanish songs while tending to the small vegetable garden behind his house. She'd think to herself that if anyone had reason to be bitter about life, it would be Harold. His wife had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier, leaving him with medical bills that still kept him up at night, calculating and recalculating numbers that never seemed to add up right. The street itself told a different story than Harold's quiet resilience. Half the houses stood empty, their windows boarded up like closed eyes. The city had stopped regular street cleaning 3 years ago due to budget cuts. Potholes created small lakes when it rained, and weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalks with the determination of survivors. The old oak tree at the corner, once the pride of the neighborhood where kids had hung rope swings, now dropped branches that nobody bothered to clear away. But Harold saw something different when he looked at Elm Street. He saw the ghost of what it had been and the potential of what it could become again. Every morning, walking to his car after his night shift, he'd pause and imagine. He'd picture Mrs. Rodriguez's old house with fresh paint and children playing in the yard again. He'd envision the corner lot, now just packed dirt and scattered trash, blooming with colors that would make people slow down just to look. The idea came to him on a particularly gray February morning. Harold was walking past the corner lot, stepping carefully around a broken bottle, when he noticed something. In all the brown and dead grass, a single dandelion had pushed through. It was the first hint of yellow he'd seen on Elm Street in months. He stopped and stared at that little flower, and something clicked inside him. If a dandelion could grow here without any help, imagine what could happen with a little care and attention. That evening, Harold drove to the garden center on the outskirts of town. He had $43 in his wallet, money he'd been saving for a new pair of work boots. Instead, he spent it on packets of marigold seeds, some basic garden tools, and a small bag of soil amendment. The teenage cashier looked at him curiously as he counted out crumpled bills. "Planning a garden?" she asked cheerfully. "Something like that," Harold replied, not quite sure himself what he was planning. "The next morning," Harold began, "he started with just a small patch, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, right at the corner where everyone could see. He pulled weeds, broke up the hard-packed soil with a hand cultivator, and mixed in the amendment. His back ached from bending over, and his knees protested against kneeling on the cold ground, but he kept working. Mrs. Chun watched from her kitchen window, curious about what her neighbor was up to. When Harold scattered the marigold seeds, he felt a little foolish. Here he was, a grown man playing in the dirt like a child, hoping something beautiful would grow in a place everyone else had given up on. But he watered the patch gently with an old coffee can and whispered a small prayer in Spanish, the same way his grandmother had taught him to plant seeds back in El Salvador. Days passed, and Harold checked his patch every morning and evening. He began to notice other things about the street during these daily inspections. The way morning light hit the old brick facade of the Martinez family house across the street, how it could be beautiful again with just a little attention. The solid bone structure of the neighborhood was still there, just hidden under years of neglect. After 2 weeks, tiny green shoots appeared. Harold felt a joy he hadn't experienced since his grandchildren were born. He couldn't help but share the news with Mrs. Chun when he saw her collecting her mail. "They're growing," he told her, gesturing toward the corner with pride. Mrs. Chun walked over to look. She was a practical woman, a retired teacher who'd seen plenty of community improvement efforts start with enthusiasm and end in disappointment. But something about Harold's genuine excitement made her smile. "That's wonderful, Harold," she said. "But you know, the city might not like you planting on public property." Harold's face fell slightly. He hadn't thought about permits or regulations. He just saw empty space and wanted to make it beautiful. "Well," Mrs. Chun continued, seeing his expression, "I suppose what they don't know won't hurt them. And besides, it's not like they're taking care of it themselves." As spring progressed, Harold's small patch transformed into a riot of golden marigolds. The flowers seemed to glow against the gray, concrete and brown dirt surrounding them. People began to notice. Drivers would slow down at the corner, not because of the stop sign they'd been ignoring for years, but to get a better look at the unexpected splash of beauty. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose house had been empty for 2 years, happened to drive by one day while visiting her sister across town. She pulled over and stared at the flowers for a long time. That corner lot had been an eyesore for so long, she'd stopped really seeing it. Now she found herself remembering how the neighborhood used to look when she'd lived there, when her children were small and played in yards that were green and cared for. Harold noticed people noticing, and it encouraged him. He expanded the garden, creating a second patch about 10 feet away from the first. This time he tried zinnias and cosmos, flowers his wife Carmen had loved. He found himself talking to her memory as he worked, telling her about the neighbors who had started waving when they saw him gardening, about the way the marigolds attracted butterflies that hadn't been seen on Elm Street in years. One morning in late April, Harold arrived at his garden to find someone else there. A young man, maybe 25, was sitting on the curb looking at the flowers. Harold approached cautiously. "They're beautiful," the young man said without looking up. "I drive this way to work every day, and I always look forward to seeing them now." "Thank you," Harold said, unsure what else to say. "I'm Kevin," the young man said, standing and extending his hand. "I live about 6 blocks over, but I take this route because of your garden. It's the best part of my morning commute." They talked for a few minutes, and Harold learned that Kevin worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm downtown. Kevin mentioned that he'd been thinking about moving out of the city, finding somewhere with more green space, but Harold's garden was making him reconsider. "You know," Kevin said, "I've been wanting to do something like this in my neighborhood too, but I never knew where to start." "Start small," Harold advised. That's all I did. After Kevin left, Harold realized something important was happening. His flowers weren't just beautifying a corner lot. They were changing how people felt about the area, making them see possibilities instead of just problems. By May, the marigolds and zinnias were in full bloom, creating a display that rivaled any professional landscape. Harold had also started cleaning up around his plantings, picking up litter and pulling weeds from the adjacent sidewalk. The corner began to look intentionally cared for rather than accidentally pretty. Mrs. Chun decided to plant flowers along her fence line. She chose petunias in purple and white, colors that complemented Harold's golden marigolds beautifully. When Harold saw what she'd done, he felt tears in his eyes. His small act was inspiring others. "The neighborhood is starting to look like it has some pride again," Mrs. Chun told him. Word about the corner garden began to spread beyond just the people who drove by daily. Maria, Harold's daughter, posted a photo on her social media with the caption, "My dad is turning our street into something beautiful, one flower at a time." The post got shared by her friends, and suddenly people Harold had never met were driving by to see the Gorilla Garden on Elm Street. A local food blogger named Jennifer Ross was one of those people. She'd heard about Harold's garden through a friend of a friend and decided to check it out while driving to interview a chef across town. What she found moved her to tears. Here was this tiny oasis of beauty in a forgotten part of the city, clearly maintained by someone who cared deeply about their community. Jennifer parked her car and walked around the garden, taquin putas. She noticed how meticulously weeded everything was, how carefully the different flowers were arranged to create visual interest. This wasn't random planting. This was art created by someone with a deep understanding of how beauty could heal a broken place. When Harold appeared with his watering can the next morning, Jennifer was there waiting for him. "Are you the person who created this?" she asked. Harold nodded suddenly, feeling self-conscious under the attention of this well-dressed young woman with her professional camera. "I'm Jennifer Ross. I write about local food and community stories. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your garden?" What followed was a conversation that lasted almost an hour. Harold told Jennifer about watching the neighborhood decline, about his wife Carmen's love of flowers, about the simple desire to see something beautiful when he walked to his car each morning. Jennifer listened with the kind of attention that made Harold feel like his words mattered. "Why this corner?" she asked. "Why not your own yard?" Harold thought for a moment. "My yard is private only, e.c. Italiano. This corner belongs to everyone. I thought maybe if people saw something beautiful here, they might remember that this neighborhood is worth caring about." Jennifer's article, titled "The Man Who Plants Hope," appeared in the city's alternative weekly newspaper 3 weeks later. It included beautiful photos of Harold's garden and quoted him extensively about his philosophy of community improvement through small acts of beauty. The article painted Harold as a quiet hero, someone who saw beyond problems to possibilities. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People began stopping by, not just to look, but to thank Harold personally. A retired teacher brought him a packet of sunflower seeds. A young mother with 2 small children asked if she could help weed. A teenager from the high school environmental club wanted to know if Harold would speak to their group about grassroots beautification. But the most significant response came from the city government. Councilwoman Patricia Williams read Jennifer's article and immediately drove to Elm Street to see Harold's garden for herself. As someone who'd been pushing for neighborhood revitalization funding for years, she understood the significance of what Harold had accomplished without any official support or budget. Patricia parked a car and walked slowly around the corner garden, which had expanded to cover nearly the entire vacant lot by this point. Harold had added pathways made from salvaged bricks, created distinct planting areas for different types of flowers, and even installed a small bench made from reclaimed wood where people could sit and enjoy the view. It was amateur work, but done with such care and vision that it felt professional. When Harold appeared that evening for his daily maintenance routine, Patricia was waiting for him. "Mr. Martinez," she said, approaching with her hand extended. "I'm Patricia Williams, city council member for this district. I've been hoping to meet you." Harold shook her hand, wondering if he was in trouble for planting on city property without permission. "I want you to know," Patricia continued, "that what you've done here is exactly the kind of community initiative our city needs more of. Have you considered applying for any of our neighborhood improvement grants?" Harold admitted he'd never heard of such grants. He'd simply seen a problem and tried to fix it the best way he knew how. Patricia spent the next half hour explaining various city programs that could help Harold expand his efforts. There were matching funds available for community beautification projects, volunteer coordination resources, and even possibilities for converting unused city lots into official community gardens. "The thing is," Patricia said, "we can write policies and allocate budgets, but we can't create the community spirit that makes these programs work. You've already done that part. You've shown people that this neighborhood is worth investing in." Over the following weeks, Harold found himself at the center of something much larger than he'd ever imagined. The city's Parks and Recreation Department reached out about providing free plants and basic landscaping supplies. A local nursery, inspired by Jennifer's article, offered Harold wholesale prices on flowers and garden tools. High school students from the environmental club began showing up on weekends to help with weeding and planting. But Harold also faced some challenges. Not everyone was happy about the changes. A few longtime residents worried that property improvements might lead to higher taxes or gentrification that would price them out of homes they'd lived in for decades. Harold listened to these concerns carefully and made sure to include longtime residents in planning decisions about the garden's expansion. "This isn't about making the neighborhood fancy," he explained at an impromptu community meeting that took place right in the corner garden. "It's about making it beautiful. There's a difference. Fancy is expensive and exclusive. Beautiful is something we can all share." By August, Elm Street was becoming a destination. Photographers came to capture the urban garden story. Families from across the city brought children to see the flower man's garden and play on. The small playground that had been installed in the adjacent lot with city funding Patricia had secured. The transformation extended beyond just Harold's corner. Inspired by his example, residents throughout the neighborhood began their own improvement projects. Mrs. Chun expanded her fence-lined garden into a full front yard renovation. The young family who'd moved into Mrs. Rodriguez's old house painted there. Shutters bright blue and planted window boxers that complemented Harold's color scheme. Even the empty houses began to look different. The city, responding to renewed community interest in the area, allocated funds to board up broken windows more attractively and clear debris from vacant lots. Real estate agents began showing properties in the neighborhood again, something that hadn't happened in years. Harold continued his daily routine of tending the garden. But now he was rarely alone. There was usually someone stopping by to chat, volunteer with weeding, or simply sit on the bench and enjoy the flowers. He'd become an unofficial neighborhood ambassador, someone visitors sought out to hear the story of how one person's simple idea had catalyzed so much positive change. In September, Harold received a phone call that surprised him. It was from Mayor Rebecca Thompson's office, asking if he would be available to meet with the mayor the following week. Harold had never spoken to anyone in city government higher than Patricia Williams, and the idea of meeting the mayor made him nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked Maria when he told her about the call. "Dad," she said, laughing, "I think you're about to find out you did something very right." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Harold took time off work, something he rarely did, and put on his best shirt and tie. He drove to City Hall, a building he'd never been inside despite living in the city for nearly 4 decades. Mayor Thompson's office was impressive, with large windows overlooking downtown and walls lined with photos of civic events and community celebrations. Harold felt out of place among the polished furniture and official portraits. Mayor Thompson turned out to be younger than Harold had expected, probably in her early 50s, with graying hair, and the kind of confident handshake that comes from years of public service. She gestured for Harold to sit in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table. "Mr. Martinez," she began, "I've been following the story of your garden since Patricia Williams first brought it to my attention. I've driven by several times, and I have to say, what you've accomplished is remarkable." Harold nodded politely, still unsure why he was there. "The reason I wanted to meet with you," the mayor continued, "is that you've demonstrated something our city planning department has been trying to figure out for years. How do you get residents invested in neighborhood improvement? How do you create community pride and engagement? You've done it organically, without any official program or budget." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and opened it on the table between them. "These are property value assessments for your neighborhood," she said, pointing to columns of numbers. "In the 6 months since your garden project began, property values in the area have increased by an average of 12%. Crime reports are down 30%. And we've received more requests for city services in your neighborhood, things like pothole repair and street cleaning, than we've gotten in the previous 3 years combined." Harold stared at the numbers, not quite understanding their full significance. "What I'm trying to say," Mayor Thompson continued, "is that your simple act of planting flowers has generated measurable improvements in quality of life, public safety, and economic development. You've accomplished what usually takes years of coordinated effort and significant funding." She closed the folder and leaned forward. "I want to offer you a position with the city, Mr. Martinez. We're creating a new role, Community Engagement Coordinator for Neighborhood Essentially, we want you to help other neighborhoods do what you've done on Elm Street. The position comes with a full-time salary, benefits, and a budget for community improvement projects." Harold felt dizzy. He'd expected praise, maybe a certificate or a photo opportunity. He hadn't expected a job offer that would change his entire life. "I don't have any education in city planning or community development," he said quietly. "No," Mayor Thompson agreed, "but you have something more valuable. You have credibility with residents and a proven track record of creating positive change. You understand that community improvement isn't really about flowers or paint or new equipment. It's about helping people remember that their neighborhood matters and that they have the power to improve it." Harold asked for time to consider the offer. That evening, he called his children to discuss the opportunity. Maria was thrilled, seeing it as recognition for her father's years of hard work and community dedication. His son Roberto, who lived in California, was initially skeptical. "Dad, you've never worked in government," Roberto pointed out. "Are you sure you want to start now, at your age?" "I'm 62, not 92, Harold replied, "and I've been working in the community my whole adult life. Maybe I just never had an official title for it." Harold spent the weekend walking through his garden and the surrounding neighborhood, thinking about the mayor's offer. He watched children playing in yards that had been empty lots 6 months earlier. He saw neighbors talking to each other across fence lines, planning coordinated improvement projects. He noticed that people walked differently on Elm Street, now not hurrying to get through quickly, but taking time to enjoy being there. On Monday morning, Harold called Mayor Thompson's office to accept the position. The announcement of Harold's appointment made local headlines. "Flower Man becomes city's newest community development leader," read the front page of the Sunday paper, complete with a photo of Harold kneeling among his marigolds. The story detailed his journey from night shift worker to municipal employee, emphasizing that his new role represented the city's commitment to grassroots community engagement. Harold's first official act as Community Engagement Coordinator was to establish the Neighborhood Spark program, providing small grants and organizational support to residents who wanted to initiate improvement projects in their own areas. Applications flooded in from across the city, people wanting to start community gardens, organize block parties, create little free libraries, paint murals, and restore pocket parks. Each project Harold approved had to meet certain criteria. It needed to be resident-initiated rather than top-down. It had to benefit the broader community, not just individual property owners. And it needed to be sustainable, something that could continue with minimal ongoing city support. Harold's approach to his new job reflected the same philosophy that had guided his corner garden. Start small, focus on beauty and community connection, and trust that good things will grow from simple acts of care. Within a year, the Neighborhood Spark program had funded 43 projects across 12 different neighborhoods. Property values citywide began showing modest increases. More significantly, citizen engagement with city government reached levels not seen in decades. People who had never attended city council meetings began showing up to advocate for their neighborhoods and volunteer for community projects. Harold continued to tend his original garden on Elm Street, now officially designated as Martinez Corner Garden, in recognition of his contribution to the community. The space had evolved into a true community gathering place, with seasonal plantings, a small pavilion for events, and educational signs about local wildlife and sustainable gardening practices. But the real legacy of Harold's simple act of planting flowers wasn't the garden itself. It was the network of relationships and sense of civic pride he'd helped create. People throughout Riverside began to see themselves as active participants in shaping their community rather than passive recipients of city services. The story of Harold Martinez and his corner garden became a case study in urban planning programs at the State University. Students would visit Elm Street to interview residents about the transformation process and study the correlation between small-scale beautification efforts and broader neighborhood improvement. Harold always told these students the same thing. "I didn't set out to change the whole neighborhood. I just wanted to see something beautiful when I walked to my car each morning. Everything else grew from that simple desire." 3 years after planting his first marigold seeds, Harold was invited to speak at a national conference on community development. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of city planners, community organizers, and elected officials, he felt the same mixture of nervousness and determination he'd experienced when he first knelt in the dirt at the corner of Elm Street. "People sometimes ask me what the secret is to successful community engagement," he said. "They want to know about funding strategies and organizational structures and stakeholder coordination. Those things matter, but they're not where you start." He clicked to a slide showing his original 6x6-foot patch of marigolds. "You start with love. Love for the place you live and the people you share it with. Everything else, the programs and the grants and the official recognition, all of that comes later, if it comes at all. But love has to come first." Harold's speech received a standing ovation, but what moved him most was a conversation afterward with a young woman from Detroit who approached him with tears in her eyes. "My neighborhood looks just like yours did 3 years ago," she said. "I've been complaining about it for years, but I never thought about just starting to fix it myself. Tomorrow, I'm going to buy some flower seeds." 6 months later, Harold received a photo in the mail. It showed a small corner garden in Detroit, bright with marigolds and with a handwritten note. On the back, "Thank you for showing me how to start." Harold kept that photo on his desk at City Hall, next to pictures of his grandchildren and a pressed marigold from his original garden. It reminded him daily that the most important changes often begin with the smallest actions, and that hope, like flowers, grows best when it's shared. Today, Harold Martinez continues his work as Community Engagement Coordinator for the city of Riverside. Elm Street has become a model neighborhood, frequently visited by officials from other cities who want to understand how community-led revitalization works. But Harold still lives in his same small house, still tends his corner garden every morning and evening, and still believes that the power to transform communities lies not in government offices or grant applications, but in the hands and hearts of ordinary people who decide to plant something beautiful where only weeds had grown before. The poor neighbor who planted flowers on an abandoned street didn't just beautify a corner lot. He planted the seeds of community transformation, showing everyone who witnessed his work that change doesn't require permission, enormous resources, or official authority. Sometimes it just requires someone willing to kneel in the dirt and plant hope where others see only problems. That's the real story behind why the mayor knocked on Harold's door. It wasn't just about flowers. It was about the recognition that true community leadership often comes from the most unexpected places, and that the solutions to our biggest urban challenges might be growing right in our own neighborhoods, planted by neighbors who simply refuse to accept that beautiful things can't grow in broken places. 5 years have passed since Harold first knelt in the dirt at the corner of Elm Street. The transformation has exceeded everyone's wildest expectations, including his own. What began as one man's modest attempt to bring beauty to a forgotten corner has become a blueprint for community revitalization that cities across the country are now studying and implementing. The Neighborhood Spark program that Harold created has expanded beyond Riverside. State officials, impressed by the documented results of grassroots community engagement, ALOCAT, funding to replicate the model in 15 other Ohio cities. Harold finds himself traveling frequently, consulting with mayors and community development directors who want to understand how to nurture organic neighborhood improvement. But success has brought unexpected challenges. Harold sometimes feels overwhelmed by the attention and responsibility that comes with being seen as an expert in community development. The quiet man who once found peace in tending his small garden now speaks at conferences, appears on local television programs, and fields phone calls from reporters writing stories about urban renewal. "I never intended to become the face of anything," Harold confided to Maria during one of their regular Sunday dinners. "I just wanted to plant some flowers." "Dad," Maria replied, serving him another portion of the rice and beans he'd taught her to make using Carmen's recipe. "You planted a lot more than flowers. You planted an idea, and ideas have a way of growing beyond what we originally intended." Maria had returned to Riverside after completing her degree, drawn back by the positive changes she'd witnessed in her childhood neighborhood. She now works as a social worker, specializing in community outreach, inspired partly by watching her father's approach to helping people discover their own capacity for positive change. The physical transformation of Elm Street continues to evolve. The corner garden has expanded into a full community park, complete with walking paths, a children's playground built by volunteer labor, and a small amphitheater where residents hold summer concerts and community meetings. Local artists have created a mosaic mural on the side of what was once an abandoned building, depicting the neighborhood's transformation through seasons of flowers and community growth. But Harold takes the most pride in changes that can't be captured in photographs or municipal statistics. Mrs. Chun, now in her 70s, has become the neighborhood's unofficial historian, documenting the stories of longtime residents and welcoming newcomers with packets of flower seeds and information about community events. She often jokes that Harold's marigolds were more effective than any formal welcome wagon at creating neighborhood connections. The young man Kevin, who first stopped to admire Harold's flowers 5 years ago, ended up buying a house 3 blocks away. He's become one of the most active volunteers in neighborhood improvement projects, using his graphic design skills to create promotional materials for community events and helping other residents document their own beautification efforts through photography and social media. Kevin's story illustrates something Harold has observed repeatedly. When people see evidence that a community cares about itself, they want to be part of that caring. The corner garden served as proof that Elm Street was a place worth investing in, worth staying in, worth improving. The economic impact has been substantial. Property values in the immediate area have increased by 38% over 5 years. But gentrification concerns that initially worried some residents have been largely mitigated by Harold's insistence that improvement efforts be community-controlled rather than long-term residents haven't been displaced. Instead, they've been empowered to participate in and benefit from their neighborhood's renewal. The success has attracted attention from academic researchers studying the relationship between small-scale community interventions and broader social change. Dr. Sarah Williams from the State University's Urban Planning Department has been documenting the Elm Street transformation as part of a longitudinal study on grassroots community development. What makes Harold's approach unique? Dr. Williams explains to her graduate students during regular field trips to the neighborhood is that it started with aesthetics rather than economics. Most community development programs focus on job creation, housing rehabilitation, or business development. Harold began with beauty, with the simple premise that people deserve to live somewhere that looks cared for. Everything else grew from that foundation. Harold has learned to articulate this philosophy more clearly over the years of speaking engagements and interviews. He often tells audiences that beauty isn't a luxury or an afterthought in community development. It's a fundamental human need that, when met, creates the emotional foundation for other positive changes. When people see beauty in their neighborhood, Harold explains, they start to see possibilities. When they see possibilities, they start to believe that positive change is achievable. When they believe change is achievable, they start to take action to make it happen. This ripple effect is visible throughout Riverside now. Neighborhoods that had no connection to Elm Street have initiated their own improvement projects, often starting with community gardens or mural projects, but expanding into more comprehensive revitalization efforts. The city has documented a 42% increase in resident-initiated community projects since Harold's program began. One of the most moving examples occurred in the Riverside neighborhood of Oakwood, about 4 miles from Elm Street. Inspired by Harold's story, a group of elderly residents in a predominantly senior housing complex decided to transform an unused courtyard area into a memorial garden honoring deceased community members. The project began modestly, with residents pooling their limited resources to purchase basic gardening supplies. But as word spread about their efforts, support began flowing from unexpected sources. Local businesses donated materials. High school students volunteered labor as part of community service requirements. The city's Parks Department provided technical assistance with soil preparation and plant selection. The Memorial Garden became not just a beautiful space, but a focal point for intergenerational connection. Young volunteers learned stories about community history from elderly residents. Older adults, some of whom had felt isolated and forgotten, discovered that their knowledge and experience were valued by younger generations. Harold was invited to the Memorial Garden's dedication ceremony, where he was moved to tears by the speeches from residents describing how his example had given them courage to transform their own community space. An 84-year-old woman named Dorothy Patterson approached him afterward with a walker decorated with small artificial flowers. "I've lived in Oakwood for 23 years, she said, gripping his hand tightly. "I used to look out my window at that empty courtyard and feel sad every day. Now I look out and see roses and benches where people sit and talk to each other. You showed us that we didn't have to wait for someone else to make our neighborhood beautiful." Stories like Dorothy's remind Harold why he continues the work, even when the administrative aspects of his city job sometimes feel overwhelming. The Neighborhood Spark program now processes over 200 applications annually, ranging from small projects like little free libraries to major undertakings like community center renovations. Each application requires evaluation, site visits, budget approval, and ongoing monitoring. Harold has built a team of community liaisons who help manage the program's expansion, but he still insists on personally visiting every proposed project site. He wants to meet the residents who will be directly affected, understand their specific needs and concerns, and ensure that each project truly reflects community priorities rather than outside agendas. This hands-on approach sometimes frustrates city administrators who prefer streamlined processes and standardized procedures. Harold has had to learn to navigate municipal bureaucracy, advocating for flexibility in program guidelines while maintaining accountability for public funding. It's been a challenging transition for someone whose background was in factory work rather than government administration. Harold has had to develop a whole new skill set, observes Patricia Williams, the city council member who first connected Harold with Mayor Thompson. He's learned to write grant applications, manage budgets, coordinate with multiple city departments, and present to city council. But he's never lost sight of what makes his approach special: the ability to see communities through the eyes of residents rather than statistics. Patricia has become one of Harold's strongest allies in city government, helping him navigate political challenges and secure funding for program expansion. She's also observed how Harold's influence has changed the culture of city government itself, making other departments more responsive to resident input and more willing to support grassroots initiatives. The police department, for example, has modified its community policing approach based on lessons learned from the Elm Street transformation. Instead of focusing primarily on enforcement and incident response, officers now receive training in recognizing and supporting positive community activities. They're encouraged to build relationships with resident leaders like Harold, who can help them understand neighborhood dynamics from a community perspective. Captain James Rodriguez, who oversees community policing efforts, credits Harold's work with improving police-community relations throughout Riverside. Harold showed us that public safety isn't just about responding to problems, it's about supporting the conditions that prevent problems from occurring in the first place. Captain Rodriguez explains, when residents feel ownership and pride in their neighborhood, when they know their neighbors and feel connected to their community, crime naturally decreases. Harold's Gardens didn't just make streets more beautiful, they made them safer. The fire department has also been influenced by Harold's approach. Fire Chief Margaret Kelly initiated a program where firefighters volunteer time to help with community improvement projects during off-duty hours. The program builds positive relationships between emergency responders and residents while contributing to neighborhood beautification efforts. Our firefighters live in these communities too, Chief Kelly explains. When they help residents plant trees or build playground equipment, they're not just doing community service, they're investing in the places where they and their families live. It's created a stronger sense of shared responsibility for community well-being. These partnerships between Harold's program and other city departments illustrate how community-led initiatives can transform government operations. Instead of seeing residents as passive recipients of services, city employees increasingly view them as partners in creating community solutions. Harold has also learned to work with private sector partners who want to support neighborhood improvement efforts. Local businesses have established a community investment fund that provides matching grants for Neighborhood Spark projects. The fund is managed by a board that includes both business leaders and resident representatives, ensuring that commercial interests support rather than override community priorities. One of the most successful business partnerships involves Martinez Gardens, a nursery chain that provides wholesale pricing on plants and gardening supplies for all Neighborhood Spark projects. The company's founder, Carlos Martinez, no relation to Harold despite sharing a surname, grew up in a neighborhood similar to Elm Street, and was inspired by Harold's story to find ways his business could contribute to community improvement. Harold proved that you don't need expensive landscape architecture to create beautiful community spaces. Carlos Martinez explains, what you need is commitment, creativity, and access to basic supplies. Our partnership helps ensure that cost isn't a barrier to neighborhood beautification. The nursery partnership has enabled communities throughout Riverside to create gardens, parks, and green spaces that would have been financially impossible under traditional funding models. Residents contribute labor and ongoing maintenance, while the city provides coordination and the nursery provides materials at cost. But Harold has also learned to be cautious about private sector involvement. Early in the program's expansion, a large retail chain approached the city about sponsoring community improvement projects in exchange for prominent advertising displays in participating neighborhoods. Harold advocated against the partnership, arguing that commercial branding would undermine the community ownership that makes grassroots projects successful. When people see a big company logo on their community garden, Harold explained to the city council during the debate over the sponsorship proposal. They start thinking of it as that company's garden instead of their garden. The moment residents stop feeling ownership of a project, they stop maintaining it, and it fails. The council initially pushed back against Harold's position, pointing to the significant funding the retail chain was offering. But Harold's prediction proved accurate when a similar corporate sponsorship program in a neighboring city resulted in gardens being abandoned after the first year when residents felt no personal connection to the branded spaces. This experience taught Harold important lessons about maintaining program integrity while seeking sustainable funding. He now insists that all business partnerships must enhance rather than replace community ownership, and that any external support must be structured to strengthen resident capacity rather than create dependence. The philosophical questions around community ownership have become increasingly important as Harold's model gains national attention. Cities from California to Maine have sent delegations to study the Neighborhood Spark program, and Harold regularly receives invitations to consult on community development projects across the country. Each consultation opportunity presents the same challenge. How do you replicate an approach that succeeded precisely because it was organic and community? Harold has learned to emphasize that communities can't simply copy his methods. They need to develop their own approaches based on their unique assets, challenges, and cultural characteristics. The flowers worked on Elm Street because flowers made sense for our community. Harold tells other cities' officials, your community might need something completely different. The important thing isn't what you plant, it's that residents are doing the planting themselves, based on their own vision of what their neighborhood could become. This nuanced understanding of community development has made Harold a Tour speaker at academic conferences and professional development workshops. His presentations often focused on the difference between community development programs that do things for residents versus programs that support residents in doing things for themselves. Harold's own education has been as remarkable as the transformation he's facilitated in his community. From a night shift factory worker with a high school education, he's become conversant in urban planning theory, community organizing principles, and municipal finance. He's taken courses in nonprofit management, grant writing, and public administration, often studying late into the night after full days of community site visits and program coordination. Maria often marvels at her father's intellectual transformation. He's always been smart, she tells people, but watching him master completely new fields of knowledge in his 60s has been incredible. He approaches learning the same way he approached that first garden, with patience, persistence, and complete commitment to doing it right. Harold's learning has been practical rather than theoretical. When he needed to understand municipal budgeting to advocate for program funding, he spent evenings studying city financial documents and attending budget committee meetings until he could speak fluently about revenue streams and expenditure priorities. When residents needed help navigating environmental regulations for a community composting project, Harold researched waste management policies and built relationships with state environmental officials. This self-directed education has given Harold credibility with both academic researchers and government officials. He can discuss community development theory with university professors and budget realities with city managers, always grounding abstract concepts in the concrete experiences of residents working to improve their neighborhoods. The personal cost of this transformation has been significant. Harold's demanding schedule leaves little time for the quiet routines that once brought him peace. He sometimes misses the simplicity of his early morning garden maintenance before each day became filled with meetings, site visits, and administrative responsibilities. His health has also been affected by the increased stress and irregular schedule of his new role. Harold developed high blood pressure during his second year as community engagement coordinator and had to learn to balance his commitment to the work with his need for self. I had to realize that burning myself out wouldn't help anyone. Harold reflects, the communities I work with need me to be sustainable, not just passionate. If I collapse from exhaustion, the programs collapse too. This realization led Harold to build more systematic support for his own well-being and for the long-term sustainability of the programs he's created. He established mentorship relationships with younger community organizers who can eventually take on leadership roles. He built administrative systems that can function without his constant oversight. Most importantly, he learned to delegate responsibilities that don't require his specific expertise or community relationships. The sustainability question extends beyond Harold's personal capacity to the long-term viability of grassroots community development as a municipal strategy. Budget pressures and political changes at the city level could potentially undermine programs that depend on government support. Harold has worked to diversify funding sources and build community capacity that can continue regardless of official policy changes. One of his most important initiatives has been training resident leaders who can coordinate neighborhood projects independently. The Community Leadership Institute, which Harold developed in partnership with the community college, provides residents with skills in project management, fundraising, volunteer coordination, and advocacy. Graduates of the program have become neighborhood liaisons who can support community improvement efforts without requiring direct city staff involvement. Rosa Hernandez, a graduate of the first Community Leadership Institute cohort, exemplifies the program's impact. A single mother working two part-time jobs, Rosa initially joined a neighborhood Spark project simply because her 80-year-old son wanted to help plant flowers in a vacant lot near their apartment building. Through her involvement in the project, she discovered organizational abilities she didn't know she possessed. I had never led anything before, Rosa explained. But watching Harold work with our group, I learned that leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about helping people work together towards something they all care about. Rosa went on to coordinate 3 additional community projects, including a after-school tutoring program and a community tool library where residents can borrow equipment for home improvement projects. She's now employed part-time by the city as a neighborhood liaison, using her bilingual skills and community connections to help Spanish-speaking residents access city services and participate in improvement initiatives. Stories like Rosa's demonstrate the multiplier effect of Harold's approach. By focusing on developing resident capacity rather than just completing projects, the Neighborhood Spark program has created a network of community leaders who can continue the work of neighborhood improvement even if official support changes. Harold takes particular pride in the leadership development aspect of his work because it reflects his core belief that sustainable community change must come from within communities themselves. External support can provide resources and technical assistance, but the vision, commitment, and ongoing stewardship must be My job isn't to improve neighborhoods, Harold often tells new staff members and community partners. My job is to support residents in improving their own neighborhoods. There's a big difference. When I do the work, it's my project. When residents do the work with my support, it's their achievement, and they'll take care of it. This philosophy has proven prescient as Harold approaches retirement age. At 67, he's beginning to plan for transitioning out of his official role while ensuring that the programs and relationships he's built can continue thriving. The succession planning process has become another opportunity to reinforce community ownership and resident leadership, rather than simply handing his responsibilities to another city employee. Harold is working to distribute leadership across the network of community liaisons, neighborhood organizations, and resident leaders he's helped develop over the years. The transition plan includes formal mentorship programs, leadership development workshops, and gradual responsibility transfers that will maintain continuity while creating space for new approaches and ideas. Harold's greatest accomplishment isn't any single project or program, observes Dr. Sarah Williams, the university researcher who has been documenting the Elm Street transformation. It's the culture change he's facilitated both within city government and within neighborhoods themselves. He's helped create a shared understanding that community improvement is everyone's responsibility and everyone's opportunity. The culture change is visible throughout Riverside now. Residents who once complained about problems to City Hall now often organize to address issues themselves first, seeking city support for resident-initiated solutions rather than waiting for top-down interventions. City employees increasingly see themselves as partners with residents rather than service providers to passive clients. This shift in civic culture extends beyond neighborhood improvement to broader community engagement. Voter turnout in local elections has increased significantly since Harold's program began, with many new participants citing their involvement in neighborhood projects as motivation for broader civic participation. City council meetings now regularly include residents advocating for community-supported initiatives rather than just complaining about problems. The ripple effects have reached the regional level as well. Riverside's success with grassroots community development has attracted state and federal attention, resulting in additional funding opportunities and policy changes that support similar approaches in other municipalities. Harold has been invited to serve on state advisory committees and federal working groups exploring community-led development strategies. Yet Harold remains most interested in the small, daily interactions that continue to drive neighborhood transformation. He still walks through Elm Street every morning, checking on the original corner garden that started everything. The space has evolved far beyond his initial modest plantings, but he continues to feel responsible for its maintenance and continued beauty. The garden now includes plantings that bloom in different seasons, suiting year-round color and interest. Community volunteers have added features like a small greenhouse for starting seedlings, rain collection barrels for sustainable watering, and composting bins that turn neighborhood organic waste into soil amendment for continued gardening efforts. Children from the elementary school regularly visit the garden for outdoor classroom activities, learning about plant biology, environmental stewardship, and community cooperation. Harold often volunteers as a guest instructor, sharing stories about the garden's history and helping young people understand their role in maintaining and improving their community. Mr. Harold taught us that you don't have to wait until you're grown up to make your neighborhood better, wrote 10-year-old Jessica Martinez, no relation, in a thank you letter after her class visit. You just have to care about where you live and be willing to work to make it beautiful. These interactions with young people give Harold hope for the long-term sustainability of the community values he's helped nurture. He sees evidence that children who grow up participating in neighborhood improvement efforts develop different expectations about their role in community life. They expect to be contributors, rather than just consumers, of community services. The educational impact extends beyond elementary school. The local high school now offers a community leadership track that includes hands-on involvement in neighborhood spark projects. Students earn academic credit for project management, research, and community engagement work while contributing to actual neighborhood improvement efforts. Many graduates of the high school's community leadership program choose to attend college locally and return to work in community development, public service, or related fields. The program has created a pipeline of young professionals who understand grassroots community work and want to build careers supporting neighborhood improvement efforts. Harold sometimes reflects on how different his own life might have been if such opportunities had existed when he was young. Growing up in El Salvador and immigrating as a young adult, he had no models for civic engagement beyond voting and following laws. The idea that ordinary residents could directly shape their communities through organized effort was foreign to his early experience. I learned about community leadership by accident. Harold often tells young people, "You're learning about it on purpose, which means you can accomplish much more than I ever imagined possible." This generational perspective shapes Harold's long-term vision for community development. He sees the current work as laying foundation for even more ambitious neighborhood transformation efforts that future leaders will design and implement. His role has been to prove that resident-led community improvement is possible. The next generation's role will be to refine and expand these approaches. The corner garden, where it all began, remains Harold's favorite place in Riverside. On quiet mornings, before the workday begins, he still finds himself kneeling among the flowers, pulling weeds and deadheading spent blooms just as he did in those early days when no one except Mrs. Chun was watching. The garden looks different, now more sophisticated in its design, more diverse in its plantings, more integrated with surrounding community amenities. But the essential spirit remains the same, a commitment to creating beauty in a place that had been forgotten, maintained by people who refuse to accept that their neighborhood can't be something wonderful. Sometimes Harold encounters visitors who have traveled from other cities to see the garden that started the transformation. They often seem disappointed by its modest scale, expecting something more dramatic given the national attention the story has received. Harold understands their reaction, but always tries to help them see beyond the physical space to the relationships and community capacity it represents. The important thing isn't how the garden looks, he explains to these visitors. The important thing is how it made people feel about their neighborhood and their ability to improve it. Once people believe they can create positive change, there's no limit to what they might accomplish.